Hi there, LW 222 students. This is just your presentation for Chapter 6 in your textbook. And Chapter 6 talks about dietary patterns, some of the dietary guidelines that are out there, and then the Choose My Plate. So first of all, I just wanted to define dietary patterns. So you're going to hear me say that word a lot throughout the course of the semester. And a dietary pattern really is defined as the quantities, proportions, variety, or combination of different foods, drinks, and nutrients in our diet, and the frequency with which they're habitually consumed. So everybody has a different eating pattern or a different dietary pattern, so they can come in different forms. But there are really four basic characteristics that healthy dietary patterns do share. So one is adequacy, two is variety, three is balance, and four is health maintenance. So as far as adequacy goes, definitely wanting to have an adequate diet that includes a wide variety of foods that are going to provide sufficient levels of calories to our body. We need certain amounts of calories each day. And then it's also going to provide each of those 6 essential nutrients. And we've just talked about those in the previous chapters. So looking at carbs, protein, fat, your 14 vitamins, your 15 minerals, and of course water. Variety is another key component of a healthful dietary pattern. So we want to have different foods from all the different food groups. So we're looking at the dairy, the grains, the proteins, the fruits, the vegetables. Consuming foods from each of those food groups is going to help us to make sure we're getting all of those essential nutrients. Then, of course, balance is another key component of a healthful dietary pattern. We don't want to have too much or too little of different nutrients. So, for example, when we look at the macronutrient ranges, for carbohydrate, that's your first macronutrient, the acceptable macronutrient distribution range, that's what AMDR stands for, is 45 to 65% of our total calories. You can see here the average intake for most Americans is at about 52%. For protein, our second macronutrient, the acceptable range is 10 to 35% of your total calories. And then for fat, the last macronutrient is 20 to 35% of our total calories. So those are the acceptable macronutrient distribution ranges for carb, protein, and fat for everyone. So we want to try to stay somewhere within those recommended ranges. So that's what we mean when we say balance in our diet. And then lastly, a dietary pattern needs to maintain our health. So we want to look at the overall long-term impact of our pattern and make sure that we're choosing foods that are going to help us have a healthy lifestyle. So it's going to help prevent things like cardiovascular disease. It's going to help keep us, to maintain our appropriate body weight. It's going to help keep our blood pressure down. It's going to help prevent type 2 diabetes. So, those are the four key characteristics of healthful dietary patterns. And in the United States, we have developed some healthy dietary patterns that we're following. And the first one that I wanted to talk about is the U.S. dietary pattern that's represented by the USDA. So these healthy dietary guidelines that have been identified in the United States are definitely things that are anchored by plant-based eating. So plant-based dietary patterns have become more mainstream because there's a lot of research out there showing that a plant-based diet can definitely reduce your risk of a lot of chronic diseases. So you can see here, these are some of the foods that we would be choosing in that dietary pattern. And then, of course, choosing more whole grains, and those are grains that include the bran, the germ, and the endosperm. And we'll talk a little bit more about that with the carbohydrate chapter. So looking at that first characteristic for the dietary patterns that were developed in 2015, number one, following a healthy eating pattern at an appropriate calorie level across the lifespan. So, our recommended calorie intake is a little bit lower when we're younger, then it increases as we get a little bit older, and then it starts to decrease as we age and we become an older adult. So we want to make sure that we're following that appropriate calorie intake as we go through our lifespan. And then, of course, healthy eating patterns you can see anchored by fruits, vegetables, whole grains. If you're choosing dairy products, make sure you're choosing fat-free or low-fat. Also make sure that we are, if we're choosing protein foods, choosing the low fat again. So seafood, or your lean meats like poultry is a great choice. Beans are a great source of protein. Nuts and seeds are also great sources of protein as well. Alcohol, obviously, limiting our consumption in moderation. Alcohol can be actually really good for us. So 1 drink a day for women, maybe 2 drinks a day for men is what we would recommend for moderation. And then, of course, as far as added sugars, we want to limit our intake of added sugars to no more than 10% of our total calories. And also watch your trans fat intake. Trans fats are the absolute worst type of fat you can ingest, so we want to keep that to a minimum as well. And then limiting our sodium intake to less than 2,300 milligrams a day. Also, the second key characteristic for those dietary guidelines is shifting to healthier food and beverage choices. So across a lifespan, again, making sure we're choosing those nutrient-dense foods. Do you remember we talked about that with Chapter 1? Nutrient-dense means it's full of nutritional value. So there's many vitamins, many minerals in that particular food item, but it's also kind of low in calories. And then also watching your beverage choices, because that's where we add a lot of calories to our intake each day is through just different beverages, not to mention a lot of sugar. And then the third guideline is to support healthy eating patterns for all. So we all have a role in helping to create and support healthy eating patterns from home. So if you're a parent, making sure that you're instilling those healthy eating values and dietary patterns into our children and sharing them with our loved ones as well. And then lastly, the physical activity side of it. There are recommendations. The Surgeon General does recommend that we get at least 150 minutes of moderate intensity activity a week. 150 minutes spread over 7 days. That's very easy to do. So thinking about moving your body as much as possible every single day. Choose My Plate. So when we look at Choose My Plate, you can see the different food groups are pictured here. They've made it a very viewer-friendly picture. So you can see that half of our plate should be made up of fruits and vegetables. And then we've got grains, especially whole grains, our lean protein sources, and then of course dairy, low fat or fat-free. So the key advice that My Plate does offer, again, is to make half your plates fruit and vegetables every time you make your plate. Eat less, right? Enjoy your food. Make sure you're choosing things you enjoy, but eat less of that to decrease your caloric intake. Make half of your grains whole. So we want to make sure that we're choosing whole grains, and at least 3 out of the 6 ounces a day should be whole grains. Try to choose fewer foods that are high in saturated fat, trans fat, added sugars, and sodium. Watch your portions. Portion control is out of control today, and many people are choosing oversized portions, which is leading to obesity. Choosing low-fat or fat-free dairy. Drink water instead of the sugary beverages like soda, juices, energy drinks. And of course, watch your sodium, right? Pay attention to that preservative that's in our foods. Something you're going to be doing here in the next few weeks is you're going to be doing a personal diet analysis. And this actually is going to be very helpful when you actually do that assignment in determining how much of different foods that you're eating. So when we look at the 5 different food groups, they're measured in cups or ounces. So as far as fruits and vegetables, these are measured in cups. So here is just a comparison of what does 1 cup look like, okay, for these different food groups. Dairy is another one that's measured in cups. Grains are measured in ounces, and protein is also measured in ounces. So you can see, for example, grains, 1 slice of bread could be equivalent to 1 ounce, or a half a cup of cooked rice or a half a cup of cooked pasta is equivalent to 1 ounce. Okay, so that can be very helpful when you're determining how much food you ate as far as that particular food group. Something else that's discussed in this chapter is the DASH diet. DASH stands for Dietary Approaches to Stop Hypertension. Many Americans today are diagnosed with hypertension, and so the DASH diet is pretty popular because it helps to reduce high blood pressure in many individuals. So again, it's just a dietary pattern that's anchored by plant-based foods. It's limiting the amounts of fats, of red meat, of your sugary drinks, of sodium as well. So it's a dietary pattern that is very, very beneficial, and many people choose to do the DASH diet because they need to lower their blood pressure. The Mediterranean diet is another popular dietary pattern that you might have heard of. The Mediterranean diet you can see here. Again, the anchor of the diet is really plant-based foods. Okay, you've got your nuts, your seeds, your beans, your whole grains, your fruits and vegetables, your oils. Okay, these are all the anchor of a Mediterranean diet. Then you can see the next level is the fish and seafood, and then even less of the poultry, the eggs, the dairy. And then at the very top, minimal amounts of the red meat and the sweets. Of course, they have wine in moderation, and then they drink a lot of water, and not to mention very active. Lots of walking, lots of moving every single day. Research is showing that the Mediterranean diet does show lower risks of heart disease. It decreases blood pressure, it decreases cholesterol, it helps people to maintain an appropriate body weight. So there's a lot of health benefit that comes from this particular dietary pattern. And then lastly, I just wanted to touch on portion sizes. Portion sizes are definitely becoming out of control today for many people, especially due to the fact that we tend to eat out a lot more in restaurants. The serving sizes are definitely more than what they should be. So this table in your book, it's kind of neat that how it shows the portion size of some different food items 20 years ago and how many calories were in that particular serving. And then in the marketplace today, how it has grown in size, and also it has grown in calories as a result. So it's just interesting to see how it was 20 years ago when you look at these basic food items, and then how it is today. And this can be very helpful for those of you that are visual learners and you want to figure out what does a cup look like. So for example, when we look at a cup, a baseball, the size of a baseball, right? If you want to know what a half a cup looks like, maybe the size of a tennis ball, or a quarter cup, maybe the size of a golf ball, right? 2 tablespoons. So many condiments are measured in, tablespoons and teaspoons. So ping pong ball, or the size of your fingertip. Ounces. So if we're looking at meat, 3 ounces of meat, the size of the deck of cards, or maybe just the palm of your hand, is equivalent to about 3 ounces of food. So when you're looking at serving sizes and trying to figure out, well, I need 2 cups of fruit a day, well, what does a cup look like? Well, if it's the size of a baseball, that's 1 cup. Okay, so 1 apple would be equal to 1 cup, for example. So that can help us to better identify, how many servings a day am I getting from each of those different food groups. So when we tend to eat away from home, we tend to eat foods that are definitely higher in calories, and then they're also higher in fat. So be cautious when we eat out. Try to avoid impulse ordering. Maybe before you go to the restaurant, figure out in your head what you're going to have before you actually, open up that menu and order. Already know going in, this is what I'm going to have. It's a healthier choice. Although this looks like it might be a lot better, but it's just not as healthy for me. So, going into the restaurant, maybe have an idea of what you're going to order prior to. Or maybe before you're going out to a party and there's going to be, a lot of snacky foods and things like that, maybe have a healthy snack prior to going so you're not starving when you get there and you want to eat everything in sight. Here, this is just showing some different calorie contents of some different fast foods and how the fast foods deserve that reputation of being high in calories, high in sodium, and high in sugar. So people who even choose like a grilled chicken sandwich, say you're going out to a fast food restaurant and you're like, I'm going to choose grilled chicken, it's a healthier choice. Well, if you look here, it still has almost 500 calories in it, just the sandwich, 1,200 milligrams of sodium, and 14 grams of sugar. So a lot of these fast food items, not only are they high in calories by themselves, but they're also really jam-packed with a ton of sodium, which we know can lead to high blood pressure if we ingest too much of it. So definitely, finding a balance between what tastes good for us, but what is healthy can be tough for individuals, but keeping some of those things in mind can help us to make those better choices.